Welcome to the Pastor's Study for another time of conversation, a little Bible study, a little encouragement, a little instruction, a little fun. I'm glad you're with us. In times of change, in times of uncertainty, or times when we're going through the transition, it's important to go back to the foundation stones, the very fundamental ideas upon which our lives have to be based, our very core of who we are, the essence of what God has called us to be. And I guess there's no other place I would start. I would rather start than in the Gospel of Luke. Let me read the story for you, because you may not be familiar with it. Some of us have grown up with it our whole lives, but let's just read for a second here. This is Jesus talking in Luke, the 10th chapter. On one occasion, it says here, verse 25, 10:25, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. This was a standard procedure. They were trying to see if there was anything they could do to bring charges against Jesus, or to find a weakness in what he was teaching that made him contrary to the law or to the traditions that they had had through the years. So he was testing Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Many of the Jews did not believe that there was such a thing as eternal life, no life after life here. So there's a kind of a multiple messages here of how Jesus is being tested. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Verse 26, Jesus is speaking now. What is written in the law? How do you read it? You're an expert in the law. You tell me what you read in the law. Verse 28. Verse 27. He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And he's quoting directly out of Deuteronomy 6:5. And love your neighbor as yourself. That's quoted out of Leviticus 19:18. So he's telling the law. He's explaining what the Jewish people had always known to be the core of the law of God. To love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. Doesn't leave anything out. I mean, it's 100% of you. And love your neighbor as yourself. Now, quoting those two scriptures. And that's what I hear God has instructed us to do. Verse 28, you have answered correctly. Jesus replied, do this and you will live. 29, but he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Now we begin the story that Jesus has wanted to tell all the way from the beginning. Okay? This is how I want you to behave. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. That was a very difficult and very dangerous road. Very, very steep passage. And in many places you couldn't see where there might be robbers and thieves or just malicious people waiting to attack you. There was a lot of cover, rocks and places where they could hide. And it was a place where a lot of robberies took place. A lot of bad things happened along the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. When he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and they went away, leaving him half dead. Verse 31. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And so too a Levite, when he came to the place, saw him pass by on the other side. Verse 33, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was and saw him. He took pity on him. Jesus went to him, bandaged his wounds, poured oil and wine on them, and put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. Now, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert of the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. It's not complicated. It's not something that requires 10,000 pages of explanation. It's not a law like we might have passed in Washington that would be a thick book by the time they got all the details of what you were supposed to do and what you were forbidden to do. The only reason we write long legal descriptions is because people have been very creative in finding ways to disobey the heart of the law. And so we have to make a lot of rules to make sure that they understand what the heart of God's law is all about. That's why there are over 600 laws written in the Torah. It takes a lot of explaining when you don't really want to obey the law in the first place, and so they make a lot of detail. Now I want you to just stop and think for a second. If one story was at the heart of the ministry of Jesus, it would be the story of the Good Samaritan. Why? Because Jesus gave us a command in the final night of his life with his disciples. He said to them, if you want to be my friends, if you want to be my followers, you have to obey what I've told you to do. Makes sense. If you want to be a friend of Jesus, you have to demonstrate the same attitudes as Jesus. You have to have the same heart as Jesus. You can't honor someone by doing the opposite of what they hold so dear. You can't honor someone or show them your love by doing the opposite of what they invested their lives doing. That's dishonoring. So what was the command? What was the command that Jesus gave us? He said, if you want to be my disciples, you will love as I have loved you. Without limits, without exception. You will love me as you love your brothers and sisters. Yeah. That doesn't take a big, thick book to explain. But it does take a lifetime to understand. That seems like a weird contradiction almost, doesn't it? It doesn't take a lot of words to explain, but it takes a long time to let it sink in. Well, I want you to understand. Most people look at the Good Samaritan and say, It's a great lesson. It's a great parable. It's a great teaching. Jesus was a wonderful teacher, but it doesn't apply to me. It doesn't apply to you. No. You see, it doesn't apply to me. Not in the year 2020, when there were people rioting in the streets. When there are all kinds of stories being passed around through the society about evil, mischievous people taking advantage, being wicked, being destructive, being hateful, planning evil across whole countries. You hear conspiracy theories of this country's trying to get us to do this, and that country's trying to get us to do that, and this group is lying about this, and this person claims to be looking out for us, but they're all... And all of a sudden, you have no idea who to trust, who to believe, or who to listen to. So, the Good Samaritan story doesn't apply to me, because our world is too dangerous. Our world is too fractured. The tension is too high. Really? Really? You think that Jesus would accept that kind of rationale? One who came with the idea of trying to test Jesus, he knew what the law said. He quoted it perfectly. But Jesus knew inside of him there was a desire to say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. You know why? There are too many people I mistrust. There are too many people that I dislike. There are too many people that hate. There are too many people that are going to potentially attack me, that are against me, that aren't working for my best interest. There are too many dangers. There are too many pressures. All right. Jesus tells a story. A man fell among thieves. If he was attacked on the road from Jericho to Jerusalem because it was a dangerous road, it was just as dangerous for the priest and just as dangerous for the Levi as it was for the Samaritan and the man who was attacked. They couldn't see who was hiding behind the rocks and boulders either. And they may still be waiting. You see, we can protect ourselves. We can rationalize our actions any way we choose at a time like this in 2020. We can say those evil people broke into stores and vandalized, and I'm not going to like them. I'm not going to be supportive of them. I'm not going to excuse that. I'm not going to even try and understand that. It was wrong. It was just terrible. It was awful. I'm not going to try and understand what happened when people were abused in the streets. I'm not going to listen to why people are so upset that they will protest day after day after day by the millions around the world. There's no time when it tests the heart of mankind any more than a time of real stress and change. Here we are in the middle of a pandemic. Some people think it's a hoax, it's fake news. It was a trick. It was a ploy. It was somebody evil with evil intent that placed this thing in the middle of our world. It's caused an economic collapse. That was not just a result of a big new illness, but a conspiracy to destroy the government and the leadership and the economy and the income for millions of people so they could profit somehow. Never been understood exactly how somebody could profit from that, but that's the theory that somebody's trying to present. And then we have the attack on George Floyd that was only the most recent in a whole string of violent attacks. And suddenly our Samaritan's heart, the heart of Jesus, is being tested. It's being put under real duress. And I understand. Jesus, as he was going to trial, had some very important decisions to make. There was a man named Barabbas who was evil through and through, like back in my childhood, Crabby Appleton. He was rotten to the core. You probably don't remember all that. Crabby Appleton, rotten to the core. Barabbas was rotten to the core. Should have gone to a cross, been punished. Jesus took his cross to Calvary in his place. He was placed between two thieves, sinners. One of them ridiculed him, humiliated him, scorned him, cursed him. And the other one said, "Can you remember me when you come into your kingdom?" While they both hung there within hours of their deaths. I want you to understand very clearly, there is no time in human history that is more stressful than that moment right there. You can talk about what happens in 2020 with all the pandemic and the economic collapse. You can talk about the stresses of a political campaign in the middle of all of this. You can talk about this group and that group and how evil and how corrupt and how terrible and how awful. But until you're hanging from a cross, stripped of your clothing, exposed to the world, in suffering, having been beaten and scourged over every inch of your body, wearing a crown of thorns, being cursed and spit on by people that should have known better, you will never know what stress is if you've not lived through that kind of an experience. Well, somebody said bad things about me or called me ugly names or destroyed my business, destroyed my livelihood, destroyed my career. Oh, too bad. How does that compare to what Jesus did? But my family has been put in danger and I've got to protect them and I've got to do all these things. I can't just let this happen. It's not right. Oh, really? Are they going to put a spear in your side in just a few minutes? I have a little thing that I like to say when People say, well, isn't it terrible that what we're enduring? And I hold my hands up and I say, yeah, but there's still no nail holes. I still haven't gone through as bad as he had it. See, no nail holes. And if Jesus still had the heart of the Good Samaritan buried inside of him, where he can look at his mother and his very best friend and say, take good care of my mother. Here, this is going to be your son now. When he could look at the thief that is on the cross, has not done one thing to show that he wanted to follow Jesus, hasn't followed him for even a single hour, and has compassion on him and gives him assurance that in just a very little bit of time he would take him to be with Jesus in eternity. And he could turn to the crowds who had pounded the nails and say, Father, forgive them. I want you to understand, we still don't know the depth of the heart of Jesus Christ if we haven't looked into his face with blood streaming down his cheeks and ask, do you love me? Do you love the people around you as I love them? If you want to be my friend, if you want me to be my follower, be just like me. Have my heart in your heart. Have my compassion, pity, forgiveness in your heart as I have in mine. Well, that doesn't work today. Jesus, you were okay in your day. Okay, fine, I get that. It was important for you to do that. But that doesn't work in 2020. We've got too many evil people around us. There's too much dirty stuff going on. Where do you get that? Where do you come up with that assumption? The heart of Jesus is not changed by what some evil people do or say or believe. It is universal. Not just for some, not for a few, not for one or two people I'm going to pick out that they're standing down here that are my family and friends at the foot of the cross. He didn't say, okay, you 6 over here, you get forgiveness, but I'm not going to forgive all those people over there. Those evil people. Those other people. No. He realized that sin is in the heart of every person. Without God's forgiveness, there's no way that one single person is so pure in their heart that they could be able to stand before the Father in heaven. In fact, the young man who wanted to test Jesus found himself tested. Understand, this isn't an easy message. It's tough. It's really hard. And I understand. But it's important for us to think about what God has put directly into our hands. This is the important one. Pay attention. Do you want to love God? Do you want to love me? You have to love like me. And the only way we can do that is to bow our heads and say, Jesus, I'm going to need a new heart to be able to do this. I'm going to need more help than I ever had before. Because in a turbulent time, in a stressful day, it's not easy to say I love you to people that are not doing the right things. But that's what Jesus did. God bless you as you try to live for him with all of your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and all your strength to be just like Jesus.